News Talk 1400 KFRU is proud to present the KFRU Heritage Series. It's a one-hour perspective on the events and the people whose lives have contributed to the heritage of Boone County. Listen each Sunday at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. The KFRU Heritage Series. From News Talk 1400 KFRU.
Well, it's nice to have you listening to us today on the Heritage Show on KFRU as we introduce you to another community member. Some of you may know because he's active in this community, and we'll find out in what ways as we visit with him today. And it's Dr. Sava Jalali, who told me that you would say this differently to Iranians. So say it like you would say it to others.
It's Sahba Jalali.
All right, Jalali. I like that, Dr.
Yes.
Jalali. I think that sounds great. Now, what kind of a doctor? What is your practice here in Columbia?
I'm an optometrist. I help people see better. I specialize in dry eyes and a number of eye health conditions as well as challenging contact lenses.
Wow. And where is your office located?
West in Columbia, in the village of Cherry Hill on Corona Road.
You've been out there since Cherry Hill was built?
Cherry Hill was in 99. I moved in 2003. So almost 10 years.
We chase side routes on this program a lot, and you've opened up one about dry eyes. I think that's a fascinating thing, and so I should ask you about that. But we'll see if we have time later, because this is not a health advice or a optometrist show necessarily, but it's a good subject to talk about. How long? Where did you do your study for your doctorate?
Right, so I have a degree in biochemistry from MU, so I'm a Mizzou Tiger, and the State School for Optometry graduate program is at UM St. Louis in Normandy in St. Louis, and there's a really good program and prepared us well.
You came to this country when?
So January 2nd, 1979.
So you're coming up on the anniversary for that.
34 years, it's crazy.
34 years. You were just a young boy at that time?
I was 12.
12 years old, and you came. Let's talk about your experiences in Colombia before we go back to some of your family's experiences in your homeland. When you came to Colombia, why Columbia, Missouri?
So I have an aunt and uncle that reside in Colombia, and the why kind of takes us back to the before. So if it's okay with you, I'll take you there.
Please.
My family and I are blessed to practice a faith called the Baha'i faith and followers of Baha'u'llah, who in a number of places in the Middle East are heavily persecuted. And so during the fervor of the Iranian Revolution in 1978 and 1979, in our hometown, they had marked out houses belonging to three different houses, 300 different houses of members of the Baha'i faith were systematically marked out as in during the rioting and during that whole revolutionary fervor, were systematically over a 3-day period burned, looted and burned to the ground. And so my parents' house, our family's house, was one of the first 50 to go. And so it was really difficult to see that. We were well enough where we had family we could go to, but I was really concerned about the people who had nowhere else to turn. And so we left Iran on Christmas Day, actually, in 1978, about 10 days after my parents' house was burned. And then we went to Germany and for a few days until my parents' visas kicked in. My mother and my brothers and my visa kicked in on January 1st, and then we went to New York City, had a little flight delay, and then came to Columbia on January 2nd, where I have an aunt and uncle who've lived in Columbia for going on a little over 40 years.
So many questions that I think people who are listening would have, and so I'll try to ask those questions. So when you say that the neighborhood was marked, the houses were marked for demolition.
For looting and burning.
Was there any consideration for, and I don't mean monetary consideration, but consideration for the health and safety of the people there? Or if a family would have stayed there, would they just been destroyed also?
I actually saw people during the first day where they burnt our house. I met someone who was dragged out of his house and beaten. And because I saw him at a friend's house.
So how'd they come and announce that your houses are targeted for demolition and we are going to do that on such and such a date? How does
so they don't announce things like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think the whole and this is a really interesting and complicated story. There's so much in the Middle East. I mean, there's nothing clear cut, and there's nothing, and it's so outside our realm of experience. I was just at a dialogue and a conversation screening a documentary on the MU campus about the experience of Baha'i college students in Iran. And the college student says, well, why would they do this? And the thing is that it's a great question because it's such an it bespeaks the fact that we have so much liberty and so much goodness in our land. I know we like to beat up on ourselves once every 4 years, but we have a lot going for us in this country, and we have so much liberty and freedom and opportunity here that is simply outside the realm of experience that someone would target one's home or one's livelihood or one's person solely for their approach to their love for their creator. And so they had it actually turned out to be the Shah's people that were behind this. He was trying to divert attention from himself and said, look, if this is all about religious fervor, then go after the religious, the people you don't like. And so the person who was actually behind this whole thing was executed after the revolution for working for the Shah. So interestingly enough,
and we had the Shah in this country at that time.
And indeed. And so, politics are never clean. So I mean, it's just, that's one of those great, I think it's unfortunate to have to say that, but I think everyone shakes their head. Everyone in the studio is shaking their head. Yeah, that's just how it is. And so then what happened was that in that morning when the rioting started, my mother and I were at home. I mean, here's the different thing outside. I don't want to give any, at 7 o'clock in the morning and maybe 7 o'clock at night, we don't have any high school students, not a huge high school demographic listening to this show.
Correct.
So
you understand it well.
So can you imagine being a high school student or in junior high? I was in the 6th grade. My peers would go out on recess and chant slogans against the Shah, and they would close the school down the rest of the day, and then we were off the next day. How does that happen? Huh. Right. And so it was one of those days. My mother taught high school. School was closed. Her school was closed. I went to middle school. My school was closed. We were both at home. We were playing cards that morning. And as mother and child may do sometime when they get some personal time together. And so then we lived on a quiet, sleepy street. We hear commotion. We never hear commotion. And I have, almost a photographic memory of this. Mom says, go outside and see what's going on. And I opened the door, and I saw this young couple with their Persian carpet in the trunk open and stuff filled in their backseat of their car. And the guy was driving like mad through our street. I'm like, well, that's something I don't see on my street. I look around. And then Mom said, what's going on? I said, come on out. And then one of our neighbors, Caddy Corner, sees us and he yells out, Mrs. Jalali, are you at home? Don't you know they're coming? Now, we didn't have to ask who, why, or what for. It was those things were all implicit in his comments. And so interesting enough, my mom's car was in the shop. And so we had no vehicle. And so all of a sudden, we look to the side, and our next door neighbor is getting in their car, and they look, and you are at home. Now, we happen to live in a neighborhood in which probably about, a third and a half were Baha'i believers. Just happened to have landed that way. It wasn't that it's not like it was concentrated very frequently, but in this neighborhood, it tended to, the person who had owned that land on that neighborhood happened to have been Baha'i, and he cut some deals, or maybe just, made it easier for some. It's a long story. And so we got in their car and we left and we didn't look back. And it just happened that quickly.
So they're going to destroy, they wanted to run you out. But where did they think you were going to go? I mean, were they going to follow you to the next place that you lived, or they expected, we've scared them enough, they're going to probably leave the country? When the question came up at the university, why would they persecute Baha'is? The question that I respond back with is, why do they persecute the Christians in Rome? Why do they put Christ on a cross? He didn't do anything wrong. He was just preaching a very peaceful message. And so I think in our country, we have a we don't have a culture or history of putting down ideas and really going after the leadership, and as if the Democrats were in power, they would round up all the Republican leadership and put them in prison, torture them, and kill half of them. I mean, this is unfathomable in the United States, and yet unfortunately, it still happens with some degree of frequency in other parts of the world. Dr. Saba Jalali is our guest, and we're talking about he's been in this country, you said 34 years, but you came directly from Iran. What were you in Tehran?
In Shiraz is my hometown.
And where is that?
That's a southern town. It's got an ancient civilization, the Persian culture. If we read in the Bible about King Cyrus or King Darius, they were based out of this hometown of mine.
So where was your father when the rioters were coming down the street?
Right. So my dad worked for a government bank. It was actually it's a lovely idea. It was a government bank whose job was to provide poor farmers with subsidized loans so they could buy seed and buy equipment and rent equipment. And so he was a VP of that bank, and so he was at work, and when we left and were dropped off to his cousin's house further in the city where they would have to go a long ways to get to their house. He immediately joined us, and we were hearing from a payphone, kind of a play-by-play of what was going on.
Wow! But you had not, prior to that day, did you have a contingency plan saying this might happen, we might have to flee, let's have this contingency plan, or was everything needed to be done like immediately because you did not have the plan?
Right. I mean, so we knew there was a revolution, and we knew there was a lot of religious fervor, and there was a religious holiday 3 days before, and someone had said, gosh, maybe we hear they might, if they riot, because that's also a religious festival where people get on the street and do a lot of chanting, a lot of marching. So say if something breaks out of this, we want to be relatively safe. So actually my father, two of my uncles, so my mom and dad and two of my uncles and their families, we sort of took off to what we would consider like the Lake of the Ozarks here. We went about a couple of hour and a half away to sort of a resort part where there is, if someone Googles the name Persepolis in Iran, there are these ancient 2,500 year old ruins that Alexander the Great destroyed. Sounds like there's a 2,500 year history of looting and burning things down.
It does.
And so there was a little resort area by it, and so we went there, but things were pretty quiet when we came back after that 3-day festival.
So you came back. This was you fled. You went there. You came back to discover your house was gone.
No, actually, we came back and the house was fine.
Oh, it was?
But 2 days later is where the rioting happened.
So was this riots? The closest thing I can have to compare this to, as far as what Benghazi, it comes to mind now.
Sure,
and there's
right.
the debate here in this country as to whether this was a planned terrorist act or whether it was a mob that got caught up in emotion and did things that those people wouldn't normally have done. Do you feel like in your particular case in Iran, when this was happening, that this was a coordinated attack? Or was it a mob that started as political fervor and then just got out of control?
There's no doubt in my mind, and I'm not the expert. If you imagine, I was a 12-year-old little boy at the time. So everything I've heard has been around Thanksgiving dinner conversations, or some, we have taken a walk with an uncle of mine, and it's like, what happened? And so the best that I understand it was very well coordinated initially. Now it might have gathered some momentum afterwards. There's no doubt in my mind that one does not mark 300 different houses in multiple neighborhoods, and you know exactly what you're going for without having a plan to start with. And it went on for 3 days until they were done, and then when they were done, they were done. It's weird to be on the balcony of my cousin's house and see 3 or 4 different plumes of smoke coming from houses, and I knew, okay, our house was yesterday or the day before, and those are 4 houses. Now, do they have young kids? Was anyone hurt? Did this family have anyone else to turn to? Did they have family in town? Did they lose everything they owned in that house? And so it's really, so I distinctly remember that. And at the end of the day, what the Word of God in the Bible teaches us is that if we deny God before man, then Christ will deny us before God. And so really what we do is we want to have integrity, we want to be truthful, and say the property and the material means of this world are only useful on this plane of existence, and we can't take it with us. But what we take with us is our faith and our integrity and the love we give to others, and the way that we handle difficult circumstances, trials, and difficulties. And so that sort of became an opportunity for that community to show its mettle and to show the kind of people they are. And that's one of the interesting things about the teachings of Baha'u'llah, is that even though I think that we're not necessarily what I would call a pacifist community, because that has some labels associated with it, Baha'u'llah himself said, if they hate you and they hurt you for my name's sake, then don't fight back and don't retaliate. Let God take care of them. And maybe by our patience and perseverance, they're going to see that we're not harmful, hurtful people.
We'll take a break here, and we'll have our first pause in our conversation today on the Heritage Show. We're talking with Dr. Sabah Jalali, and he practices, is it optometry? Optometry. I don't know I didn't know whether that was the correct
you are
way
right
to say eye doctor or not. But
yes,
that's
perfect.
That's what he is, and we'll be back with him on the Heritage Show on KFRU.
This is the KFRU Heritage Series. More coming up on News Talk 1400. KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
This is the Heritage Show, and we talk about personalities from this community who have interesting stories to tell. Not all of them are totally about Boone County or Columbia, but the guest that we have now has settled in Columbia, been here for 30-plus years, and practices optometry here. He's Dr. Sabah Jalali, and came from Iran in the late 70s and made it, and he even knows the date. He told us in the first segment, January 2nd, 1979, to Columbia. Had some relatives here. So much that you said in our first segment that I want to follow up on. I'm curious as just on the time when you knew that you needed to flee your home because there was a gang or a mob that was coming. Can you remember the sounds? Can you remember, I know sights, you mentioned that, but can you remember sounds and smells of that time too?
Yeah, we lived there were a couple of roads that were maybe not paved, so I remember a lot of dust being up because cars were peeling. And generally Iranians are fast drivers. Gosh, I hope they're not listening, because that's going to get me into trouble. But so that shouldn't have been. But they were driving extremely fast. I mean, the rate of speed. I was like, it was, and just the fact that people had their belongings piled in. I mean, they didn't have time to get a U-Haul truck, right? Whatever you could put in your car, you took with you was really an interesting sight. And so that sound of noise in the distance and people hustling and bustling on a quiet, sleepy street and cars peeling out quick was left an indelible memory.
Let me talk about the Baha'i faith for just a second. Let me ask you first a couple of questions. How large of an Iranian population would you estimate that there is in Colombia?
I would say between maybe 200 to 400. I mean, there's a few.
How many of them would be of the Baha'i faith, or would it be a diverse population?
Right. No, I think that in Colombia, well, not that I think, I'm pretty confident that we have about 3, 4, 5 Persian Baha'is. So the rest of them are from some sort of either Jewish or Muslim or Christian heritage.
But if someone would say, if I would meet someone who has an Iranian background in Colombia, let's say I meet him at a restaurant and say, I should not assume that they are Baha'i, correct?
Probably not, exactly. So Iran right now has about a population of 72 million. And the Baha'i faith, by and large, the largest minority at about 300,000 to 500,000, depending on whose estimates. Certainly, in 1978, when the population of Iran was only 35 million, there were over 500,000 Baha'is. And that was the largest religious minority, because the largest community after that was Jewish, with maybe about 50,000.
See, we wouldn't have thought that, I don't think, but 50,000 wasn't much within a country of
35 million.
35 million. What are the tenets of the Baha'i faith? What would be key? And you mentioned some of those in the first segment, but I'm curious as to if you can be more, I guess, more formal in what does this faith stand for, or who is its leader?
So Baha'u'llah, whose title means the glory of God, founded the Baha'i faith in the mid-1800s, and he said that religion should be an instrument of peace and healing in the world, and not an instrument of hatred or war, and that he acknowledged that we have a divine creator whose personal voice we may not hear, but with whom we have a personal relationship, and that He created us in His own spiritual image and has sent us teachers that guide us to His path. Now, by He is a convention because God is not a physical, does not have a physical
Non-gender,
gender,
yep.
right? And is this being that is, His ways are so far above our ways, but that this divine being manifests from age to age beings that guide us to that path. So, for example, when Christ said, "If you have known Moses, you would have known me." Or Christ said, "I have many things to tell you, but you cannot bear them now, and I will send you the Spirit of truth, and He will guide you unto all truth." So that Baha'u'llah said that religion is not a static experience, but as humanity changes and grows, that spiritually and socially, then we need further teachers. And so Baha'is hold Baha'u'llah to be latest of God's teachers, or what he called manifestations that reveal something about God that was not known before.
You made references to many of the persons that we would have known as a Christian growing up, so the Bible is important to you?
So Baha'u'llah said that the Word of God in the Bible is from God, and everything that the Word of God in the Bible teaches about Christ is accurate.
But there would be different revelations since then that you might see as holy or scriptural that a Christian does not.
Two that I would say, Baha'u'llah taught that even though we may not always agree with how we perceive Islam being practiced, but that Muhammad, when he took a bellicose group of tribes in Arabia and created a level of science and culture and development, that came from God, and that this would be a great conversation on a different day, but that all of us who have faith have a testimony, and that bespeaks our personal experience. And I think that one of the things that Baha'u'llah teaches is that God created our intellect, and He also created our spiritual nature, and that these two things should not compete with each other, and they should harmonize with each other. So our intellect can be utilized to explain things logically to where we can understand, and that should speak to our faith.
Do you think this affects your optometry practice now? How do you incorporate it into your daily activity?
Well, I find that during the day I work really hard to be compassionate with everyone that comes in. So even though we think of the eyes as windows to the soul, there really is a soul that's walking into my office. And so what are they experiencing in life? And how is their vision, how is their outlook in the world being affected by everything that goes on with their person? And so sometimes I'll walk in and I'll say to someone, "How's life?" And sometimes they really open up and tell me where life is at. And so
help me understand this, and then we'll move on. But I'm curious as to the relationship of Baha'i to the Islam community. So is it part of that, or is it how is that relationship?
So Baha'u'llah, who was born in Iran, actually, in Tehran in 1817, lived there. His family was quite wealthy. He was one of the wealthy elites, and yet he was willing to sacrifice everything he had for what he was teaching. And so as Baha'is, I consider myself as much a believer in Christ as I do a believer in Baha'u'llah. I consider myself as strong a believer in Abraham and Moses as I am a believer in Baha'u'llah. And I consider myself a believer in Muhammad as I am a believer in Baha'u'llah. And so Baha'is have had tremendous respect for what Muhammad brought to humanity. And so as a persecuted group, so the Bible teaches us that God is love. So if I hate, then I've taken God out of myself. And so it's really, if we want God within us, then we have to have some love within us. And you can't have water and fire dwell in the same heart. And so we can't have love and hate dwell in the same heart. I can't say I'm a loving person and hate a human being. That's an oxymoron.
Again, our guest is Dr. Sabah Jalali, and he's an optometrist in town, and we're talking about his experience moving from Iran to Colombia in the late 70s because of what was happening in his home country. How politics gets involved in this. So why was there such a hatred of the Baha'i if it were just because this was a minority piece? I'm asking you what you said the university students were asking and what they are confused about, because I don't see that a lot of things don't stir up people very much in this country. We're either illiterate, or we're just too unempathetic, or maybe we just are clueless as to what's going on.
I wouldn't couch it negatively, Dave, if I can sort of go that path with you, because I really feel like we have such level of tolerance, and that we allow people to feel and believe how they want to believe, and as long as that's not hurting another human being, we leave them alone in this great country. And that's what one of the many things that I think people around the world admire about the United States. And I think we should be proud of that. And I'm very proud of that, because without that opportunity, perhaps, I think my parents would have stayed around. They would have killed them. And Lord knows what would have happened to my 8-year-old brother and my 12-year-old self when I was at that age. So I think I'm really, really grateful. So I think what
made the anger so strong towards a specific person or a group of people at that time?
So there's a 150-year history, and that history actually goes back well over 1,000 or 2,000 years. If we look in the book of Luke, there's this little. The author of Luke, Dr. Luke, talks about how there were a couple of ecclesiastes that were talking, and they say, well, maybe the message of Jesus is not that bad. Maybe we should let him be. And then the other one says to the other, well, if everyone goes and follows Christ, then what would happen to our power and our property? And so there's this, wherever power resides, power always likes to protect itself and protects its back. And so the people that saw, maybe perceptually erroneously, as the teachings of Baha'u'llah or the person of Baha'u'llah as a threat, then would be naturally threatened. And instead of taking a dispassionate view of, let's say, well, what has Baha'u'llah done to try to harm the Islamic clergy? He's done nothing. But, I think when we're threatened, when we feel as human beings threatened, sometimes that gets our emotions involved. We don't think very logically. That's how I would answer that college student.
We, from a distance, sometimes wonder if it's really religion that is motivating the unrest in certain countries, Middle East countries, or expanded beyond. You really feel like religion is behind much of what's happening there?
Well, so... that's a great question. I don't know that I've given it a lot of thought, but I would naturally say that when we look at the foundations of all faiths, that by and large they teach the golden rule: do unto others as you would want to yourself, or some version of that. And so often, those who seek power or those who have a vested interest use religious belief or religious loyalty or religious fervor as a means of pinning one group against another, when we should feel that so when someone harms us, we should turn the other cheek. I mean, that's what Christ taught us. And but they say, well, no, they're the infidels, or they're this, or they're that. And so I think any time anyone argues over religion, that bespeaks maybe a little bit of lack of knowledge about what that religion teaches as its foundation, because all faiths teach about love of humanity. We should love our neighbor. We should love our fellow man.
Sometimes I think the irreligious use religion, though, for those purposes, even though that's not what is really motivating them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We'll take a break, and we'll come back for one final segment. And I'm going to ask about Argo, but other things when we come back and visit with Dr. Sabah Jalali on the Heritage Program on KFRU.
This is the KFRU Heritage Series. More coming up on News Talk 1400, KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
Our conversation continues with Dr. Sabah Jalali, an optometrist in Colombia. And I hope you've heard what he's had to say about his faith, also about his experiences as a young person up until about the age of 12, when his family needed to flee Iran. They came to Colombia because they had some relatives here, and they knew it would be, or at least they hoped, and I think that's turned out to be a tolerating, good place to be. When you came here, did you know any English?
So if someone has taken maybe French or Spanish in school, I was in English 1 in middle school. So think about where the first semester of English of Spanish 1 or French 1 would be, and that would have been my level.
So January 2nd in 1979, you moved to Columbia, 12-year-old. What
Right.
school did you? I mean, did you start school immediately within a few days?
I did because of course we were on Christmas and winter break, and I'll tell you I have to go back because I grew up in Iran. The second or third largest peak in Asia is in Iran, and part of the Caucasus Mountains near Tehran, and so there's plenty of snow in Iran, just not where I was raised. I was raised on a beach and a coast, and so think of me as the kid who grew up in El Paso, and then moves to, and I don't know who all remembers that winter of 78, 79, we had more school closings that winter than I don't know if I remember any other time. And there were 2-3 feet of snow. Oh, I'd never seen snow before. And so in Iran, because I lived in an arid part of the country, there was not grass in Europe. So all of our lawns and yards, if you will, were tiled. Mm-hmm. And so I did not know that the front yard had grass until the snow melts in March. I'm like, what's that dirt doing here? And what's that grass doing here? And so that was my experience. So I walked in, I'm like, oh my gosh. Like I walked into the North Pole is what I felt like, because I saw all this ice and snow. And so I played in snow for the first time on January 2nd and 3rd, and then school restarted again. And so
you went to what school?
Went to Fairview Elementary. So school started, went to 6th grade, Mrs. Tedesco's class, Mrs. Betsy Baker, who was the principal at Betsy, if you're listening, hi, who was for some time principal at Parkade, was the homeroom next door. And I still have friends that I see on a regular basis that were my classmates in that 6th grade class. So
do you have memories of struggling to fit in or to understand what was going on, or were there others that were in similar situations that you could kind of form a bond with?
I'll tell you, the kids were so friendly. Doug Krause and I we grew up in the same neighborhood thereafter, and I remember I don't know how was it that I walked into school without a pencil. What's up with that? But I walked in and I didn't have a pencil, and so Doug, I distinctly remember, sharpened a pencil and he gave me a pencil. I'm like, oh, what a nice guy. His cousin Brad was in the same class, and so those two guys became good friends of mine, and we still see each other. 32 years, 34 years later, I see them multiple times a year.
During that time period, though, I would guess 6th graders aren't too keen on what's going on internationally with the international intrigue and also with the hostage situation and things of that nature. Did you ever feel that year or soon after that any kind of negative reaction to you being here?
6th grade and 7th grade were a piece of cake because I think during the revolution, I remember like when the Shah got kicked out and the Ayatollah came in, there were newspapers that were posted on our school so kids could read and see what's going on in other parts of the world, and I can tell you that 6th grade at Fairview and 7th grade at Jeff were just breeze, and kids were very friendly, very empathetic, and those were great foundational experiences for me. I have friendships that to this day, I've friends that I know I had 7th grade science with Mrs. Fouts, or just all kinds of different classes. And then in 8th grade, in November 4th in 1979, when the hostages were taken, then all of a sudden, being Iranian was not very empathetic. And in the 8th grade, there were a few kids that were not so kind. But I can tell you that my teachers and my administrators at Jeff Jr., Dr. Willard, Dr. Klingensmith, the administration and staff were very supportive. And I was not one to need to fight my own battles. I'm not necessarily, all right, I've got some bravado, and if they're going to say something, why, they're going to hear from me. I'm like, I don't think that's against school rules. Shouldn't an administrator do something about that?
That works. That always works.
And so I sort of sent it up the ladder. And so I didn't take it, I would talk to my parents and we would talk at home and say, well, is this personal against you? No. Is it against the people in Iran? Yes. Are they the same people that we're here because of? Yes. So I think their anger I could empathize with, and knew that it was really not they were not coming after me. I was just the closest thing to an Iranian enemy they could identify.
Do you remember when the hostages were released as Ronald Reagan was inaugurated? That would have been in 81.
Exactly. I was in the 9th grade, and I distinctly remember they actually brought announcements into each class. I had first semester, or rather first year algebra in the 9th grade. I remember the weirdest things, David, and I remember exactly in which class they announced that the hostages were freed. I remember
There would have been I would guess, a reaction, quite cheering and all from the U.S. students. Did you join in that, or did you have any other feelings?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what I was empathetic with is that there are, even right now, there are about 110 Iranian Baha'is in Iranian prisons right now. And on occasion, I hear about, someone was beaten so badly they were in the hospital. Please pray extra for them. And that happened just within the last couple of weeks, for example. I'll tell you where it gets really personal, is that there is an optometrist among that 110 with a 14-year-old son, and I have a 13-year-old daughter. So think about that guy's been in prison for about 3 to 4 years. So I think about when I take my child to school, when I have dinner at home, when I hear about their day at school, when I celebrate birthdays or holidays, I frequently think that, and I think about him and his cohorts on a daily basis. I keep them in my thoughts and prayers. There's not a day goes by. I've got a picture of 7 of them on my desk at work, because I look at them every time I have a down day. All I have to do is look at their picture and say their day sucks way more than mine does.
You have such a positive outlook. I'm curious as to September 11th, 2001, Americans sometimes are not good at distinguishing the background of people. Did you feel anything at that point in time, or soon after that, people looking at you with a little bit different eyes, even though they were clueless as to how you were not anywhere near that background?
I'll tell you. So because when I walk into a space, I don't think of myself as this Iranian American that walks into. I'm relatively active in the chamber. I've got lots of friends there. I'm a Hickman alum. I'm a Mizzou alum, so I go to some alumni activity. My friends that know me know I am a crazy, huge MU football fan, and so I go to football games. I'm sitting among 65 or, on a great day, 70,000 of my closest friends, yelling my heart out. And I tease my friends. I say that's where it's socially acceptable for me to yell at the top of my voice. And so I don't walk in thinking I'm this foreign guy. I really felt like I've been welcomed so warmly into my adoptive home that I don't walk into a space thinking that I'm different than the next guy, and that thought never crosses my mind. So from that perspective, I was really concerned about Middle Easterners who might have. But I think Colombia is such a peaceful town, and we have a tolerant and well-educated town that I think Colombia was somewhat insulated by some of the isolated events that happened on that day. But we have to understand that in our country, as many great things as we have going for us, we have to still overcome some prejudices at some point in time. And we've come a long ways in 50 years as a nation. And that doesn't mean that we don't have work to do. And so I can tell you that I'll tell you a funny story. Can I tell you just one quick story? So I was at that point in time, as my office was I hadn't built Advanced Vision and opened Advanced Vision. That's a plug for my office in Cherry Hill for someone who doesn't know me. And so that office I opened in 2003. So I was driving to Sedalia to work. So I mean, Sedalia is somewhat more provincial than we are in Colombia, and so this one shortly after that. I was walking to greet someone and take them back into their examination, and I heard these two fellas sort of talking about blankety blank, we're not going to have any. And then I'm like, hi, I'm your doctor. I'm going to take care of you. And sort of like look on his face as, oh my gosh, I really need to be nice to this guy. So I just shrugged it off. But also I can tell you that in Sedalia, people would ask for me because then I once asked someone who, I mean, clearly this is a farmer and this guy is in overalls. I mean, classic paint the picture. And he said that I came asking for you. So why did you come ask for me? Because said, well, I heard of your reputation, and I knew that you were good. And sometimes they would call, and my staff would tease me and say, somebody called, and they said they wanted to see the Indian doctor. And so shit, you know what? Close enough. Get him in. Happy to see him. So I think what we have to really realize at the end of the day, what doesn't matter what the color of our skin is, where our ancestors came from. So my kids' ancestors came from Iran, but they also came from Germany and from Ireland because of my Anglo-European wife. And so I think it doesn't matter whether our heritage is from Asia, Africa, Latin America, or Europe, that we belong to an extended human family. And as long as we treat everyone that way, we're going to be A-okay.
That would be a good place to end, but we still have 2 minutes. So I'm going to ask you to respond to Argo. We've got less than 2 minutes. Ben Affleck's movie, and it has to do with the 6 who escaped the U.S. Embassy, holed up in the Canadian Embassy. The CIA and others concocted this plan of saying they were there as Canadians to do a movie, and they were eventually ushered out of the country just at the last minute. And of course, it's dramatized in the movie, but it's a good movie. And I just wonder if that brings back to your family, or of course, you were young at that point in time when that time was happening. It's a good movie, I thought.
It did. I remember all of it. And I took my kids when I went to the movie theater, took the kids and sat down and I think Ben Affleck did a great job. It was very factual to the experience.
Creating the scenes.
And scenes, absolutely. And
amazing.
At the end of the, right, not to give too much away, but at the end they juxtapositioned how accurate they worked hard to make the movie. And in my own personal experience, I really felt like they did a really, really good job, because I felt like I didn't feel like there was too much Hollywood in there in terms of that Iranian experience side. And certainly there are a couple of times where I had some chills in the movie because I really, really empathized with what was going on with the people. And
I don't think that it's at the multiplex at Tehran right now, probably. But
no, but I'm sure people are finding ways to see it, and
interesting.
It is. I think that some of those historical events, we've got a lot of drama that's happening in the world right now, and so hopefully someone will tell those stories in the future.
Thanks for telling your story to us today. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on your show.
Very nice to be able to introduce to our listeners on the Heritage Series the guest today, optometrist Sabah Jalali, who's been in this country since 1979, and it's a pleasure to have him as our guest, and we'll look forward to our next program, The Heritage Show, on News Talk 1400 KFRU.
You've been listening to the KFRU Heritage Series, celebrating our history and heritage of Columbia and Boone County. Listen each Sunday at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. The KFRU Heritage Series. From News Talk